So we are going through the series called Unshakeable. It's a journey through the book of 1 John. And really, every time I read this book, it is so encouraging. If there is one word that captures the theme of this entire book, that word is the title we use, Unshakable. How can you be unshakable living a life when it is filled with trials and temptations and challenges and difficulties? How can we go through life without being shaken when storms come about, without being shaken when we lose some loved ones, without being shaken when our dreams come true? And so we have here a passage that is written by John, who is in his 80s and 90s and who is unshaken. He's going strong. He's going to finish strong. Even though they are going to throw him in an island in Patmos where no one is going to be there, he's going to get the glorious vision of his life that's penned down in the book of Revelation. So if I want to hear about living an unshakable life, I want to hear from someone like John. I can speak about it, but I haven't lived a full life. I haven't seen all of life's challenges. It can be inspirational, but this is the real deal when a guy who has been the one who loved Jesus the most, he was called the beloved of Christ. A guy who was probably the only disciple who didn't quit when all others quit with Jesus. A guy who penned the Gospel of John in a way that captivated the hearts of people all around the world till this day. A guy who till his very last breath was unshakable. When he writes it, we can listen. And so far, he has been encouraging us. He started by saying how we can have unshakable joy by looking at Christ. Then he encouraged us by saying, even when you fall, nothing can shake you. You can go back to this Jesus and experience forgiveness. And he spoke about how we always belong to this unshakable family. Nothing that you ever do can take you away from this family of God. You belong here because of what Christ has done. After all these encouragements, the first time in his epistle, John is giving us a command. He gets serious and he says, well, if there is one thing I want to command you guys, this is it. This is the central thing that is the command I want to leave with you. And that's the first point we are going to look at. In the first verse, he says, do not love. Verse 15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. You know, love is very important for John, you know, the beloved disciple. So the first thing we are going to look at is the love God hates. The love God hates. It's the first command. Do not love the world or things in the world. Now, there are two words we want to understand from this verse. And the words are world and love. What does he mean by world and what does he mean by love? You know, when John uses the word world several times, both throughout his gospel as well as in the epistle. And there are three different meanings in which he uses the word world. You know, when he says world, in many times, it comes from the word cosmos. It refers to the physical world. And is he saying, don't love the physical world? We all know when we take a drive through Freeway 1 and see these gorgeous bluffs and beautiful oceans, we can't but resist saying, wow. Or when we go through, spring comes and we drive through and see the California poppies falling over the rolling hills of California, we can't resist by saying, wow. No, that's not what John is meaning here. When God created the world, he created and it was good. Even though sin has marred it, it's still beautiful. That's not the way in which he's talking to. And there are other times he uses the world to refer to as people. The famous verse, John 3:16, God so loved the world. It's the world of people. And even in 1 John, he says, God gave his life for the world. So in that sense, he's not saying hate people. But the way in which he uses the way world is the third category which we are going to look at. By what it means is he's looking at the world, systems of the world, looking at the world and all things in it materialistically. He is specifically nailing it to living life as though the material world is all there is to life. We've heard this term, being materialistic. What does living materialistically mean? A person who lives materialistically believes that all the things in the world that we see is all there is to it, and we let ourselves be controlled by all these material things rather than God. That's the word. So John is saying, hey, when it comes to love, you can't love the world, the material things of the world. And the second word we want to look at is the word love itself. And the Greek word, we know there are a lot of Greek words to it. The one he uses is agape. You know, agape is a deep, intense, passionate love. It's a word that was in contemporary Greek that was taken and given a richer meaning. It's positively referred to in the way in which God loves us unconditionally. It's also applied in many times to when people love something so passionately that they'll go about sacrificing everything else. It's like, I'm sure all of you have your pet peeves for certain things, right? And that's why we ask what your favorite hobby is. It's like you see it, that thing really drives you. It could be this, you can't start work without getting a shot of this espresso from this particular Starbucks. Or it's like this hobby you have, you know, this passion you have. And do you know what my hobby is? Most of you know, it's fishing. Because if I get a chance, you know, you see all these bumper stickers people have, right? I'd rather be flying, or I'd rather be doing other things than driving. So everybody knows what our love is. You really love it. There's something about it. For those of you who haven't fished, I can't explain to you how beautiful it is and why we should all be fishing. But you have your own fishing thing. You love it, right? You know what I'm talking about. For some people, it can, be about keeping your house clean or decorating it. You love those things. For some people, it's eating, or I don't know. But it's a deep love. So John is saying, you can have that love only for God. You cannot love two opposite things at the same time. You know, the first century father, St. Augustine, he was the one who was instrumental in shaping most of our church theology and understanding. And St. Augustine, he is actually an African. You know, interestingly, most of our biblical understandings have African roots in the church history, from Hippo, Augustine. His mother was the one who raised him up in God. His mother was the one who prayed so fervently that he will find his love in Christ alone. But Augustine, if you read his book called Confessions, he wrote a book. In the Confessions, he talks about how, till he met Christ, his love was for everything else in this world, how he was so torn apart until he found Christ. And thanks to his mother's prayer and the grace of God, when he found Christ, his life transformed. And then he wrote a beautiful quote, which is like this. He says, when we find Christ, if he is not our first love, if there are other things that compete for the love, he used the analogy of marriage. And he says it's like loving the ring and not the lover. Let me unpack that illustration and try to contextualize it to some of us. You know, I came to this country and I was working, and whenever some of my friends who were born and raised in this country, the way they get married is they find a girl and then they get engaged. Right? So there's this American colleague of mine. He's now a professor in University of Central Florida. He was doing postdoc with me, and he was like, man, I love this girl. I'm going to propose to her, but I have to get this gorgeous ring. Because you know what? That's what they go around showing everybody. And if that ring is small, they'll think I don't love her enough. And he was a postdoc like me, and students, not much money, so he would sacrifice himself, not eat at restaurants, save up, so he can buy this gorgeous ring. And so when he gave her that ring, she's a Hispanic American. For her, it's a different culture. She was just thrilled by the fact that he loved her. The ring, it didn't even matter at that point. Or for some of the friends who were raised in India, it's not the ring, it's the chain. They call it the thali. Right? And I remember when I got my sister married, what a big deal it was. Some relatives especially are very particular about the size of that. How heavy it is indicative of how much you actually love. Because that's what everybody sees. And how horrible it would be if you get married and you show love to your husband purely based on either the size of the ring or the thickness of the chain. And by the way, you can't wear those chains around in the Bay Area, they snatch it. So if any of you are still wearing it, please take it off. So you see what basically John is saying is, you can't love two things. You can't be materialistic and love the world and say, I love God too. They don't go together. It's not just that. The second thing in this next verse he says is that this materialistic love hurts us. So that's the second point we are going to see, love that hurts us. Verse 16, for all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. Wow. Here he is unpacking this deep love even more significantly for us. The word he uses for lust or desire, it's repeated twice in this verse, is epithumia. Epi is a word we know. When there is an earthquake, there's always an epicenter of an earthquake. What happens at the epicenter if you happen to be at the epicenter of the earthquake? That's where the devastation is huge. That's where it's all concentrated. It's all like intense. And so what he's talking about is having a desire, epithumia, or an intense desire, or an over desire, or there is actually another contemporary word for it that you might be surprised, and we never think that word applies to us. It's called addiction. Addiction. Addiction is something that messes up our brain. They say it hijacks our brain. It happens as our brain goes through a series of changes when you think of something you so intensely love, whether it is money or power or pleasure. It begins with, when you see that, the first thing it does is it brings to your mind the pleasure you can get out of it. And then it ends with making you go for it again and again and again till it becomes a compulsive behavior. It shows itself in three ways. It starts with creating a craving for it, And then as you crave and start going back, you lose control over it. And the third thing is the sad thing. You know that it hurts you, and you still do it. And it significantly alters your brain chemistry. There is a point in your brain that secretes a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And every time your brain senses pleasure, your dopamine gets secreted in your brain. But the amount of dopamine that gets secreted and the speed at which it gets secreted is what gives us pleasure. And when you get addicted, your brain is totally messed up because that's what it does. And that's when people end up, when the object that they so intensely love stops giving them pleasure, they start injecting it, they start taking it through other sources. In fact, who uses these chemistry and this neurological understanding the most? It's actually the food industry. They have precisely calculated the ratio between salt and sweet and oil so it can trigger the release of dopamine the moment you put it in your mouth, which is why you can't resist a bag of chips. You want to keep eating it, isn't it? And you don't think, oh, this is not a drug. I'm not smoking. But it's actually junk. And it's not just with chips and food. It becomes more bad when it tends to be about the world. Just seeing it excites you. How do we love the world? The word he uses is, do not love the world, desires of the flesh. The word for flesh is sarkos. It's physical body. It's anything related to our body. What he's saying is, don't love things that are materialistic, that get to your body. What are some things that relate to our body that the world is always trying to draw our attention to, if you think about it? There can be several. I just wanted to pick on two. One is beauty, right? How we look. There is the saying, we try to live to eat, don't eat to live. Eat to live, but not live to eat. Isn't it? And the problem is that it's okay to work out and be in shape so we can live healthy, but sometimes if you're so driven by how to carve out a body that people will fall for so I can draw my sense of self-worth from it, that's when it becomes bad. Or you go to the point of being obsessed with how we look and more obsessed with how others perceive how we look. That's when it becomes bad. Something as simple as our physical appearance, sarcos. If you get fixated on it, that's not healthy. Or the other thing about our body is pleasure, this very thing that draws addiction. How much we want. Even good things can become bad. And whether it's food or something as significant as sex. And that's two of the most important things people fall for. Sweets are good, but too much of it is not good. And in the same way, God created sexual pleasure with a higher purpose. It was to only happen within the confines of a marriage where two people are totally okay to be vulnerable completely with each other by sharing their nakedness with one another and their whole self. It's kind of a reflection of what we are going to experience in heaven, where we will be fully known. It's holy, and that's the reason why God says it needs to happen in a relationship. When you take that out of that and start putting it out, and either you want to experience the same pleasure without that commitment, whether it is visually looking at things or through other relationships, is when it becomes pathological. That's sarcos. That's the addiction of the flesh. And it is sad how many people, how many marriages, how many families have been destroyed, including great men and women of God, because of this aspect that we are reading about. The second thing he talks about is lust of the eyes, epithumia. We hear the saying, there is more to it than meets the eye, right? Once we see a person, we tend to form preconceived ideas about them, even before we even know them. Addiction always appears first to our senses. It's sensory first. Because love is attached to feelings. All advertisements, if you think about it, they go after our senses. Remember, what is the most popular ad that you watched recently that sticks out to your mind? A few years ago, I was reading something called transactional analysis, where they say, we all have a child ego and an adult ego. And so when they want to sell you something, they want to attack both your child ego as well as your adult ego. So for example, if you look at an ad for Tesla that says 0 to, 90 miles per hour in 3 seconds, you're like, wow, that's cool. You're never going to do that in the real world. But it's like it gets to your child ego. And then it will say, oh, by the way, it's green, and it has a 300-mile range, and it has all these other features that appeals to your adult ego. But it's just, they know this. The advertising world knows exactly where to hit to get us. Why do we still take the bait, though? Why do we still go for it? You know why? There is a clue to us in the very first temptation that man ever experienced, Adam and Eve. We look about that a little bit further, because it says when they saw it, it was good to the eyes. It hasn't changed. It's the same formula till today. It's not only that it is good to the eyes, it said that when you eat of it, you will be like God. There is that deep, sinful desire within each of us to want to be like God. Because it helps us feel in control. I can do what I want, when I want, how I want. It's a good feeling. And then we take it because we see the pleasure that it gives. You know, the desire of the eyes in Scripture, if you look at it, the eyes are the primary organ of perception. And that's the principal avenue of temptation too. One of the most graphic and sad stories in the Bible is that of King David and Bathsheba. Here is this great and mighty king, a shepherd boy turned into a mighty king that God was going to use to build the greatest kingdom of Israel. And how does his fall begins? In times when kings were meant to go to war, he was walking on the roof of his palace and set his eyes upon this beautiful woman who was having a bath. It was as simple as that. There began his downfall. But the desires of the flesh is not just referring to sexual lust. You know, in Matthew chapter 6:22, Jesus said, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness," in verse 23. And it's not just that, our eyes are closely related to our heart. You know, Proverbs 17:24 says that discerning sets his face toward wisdom, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth. And in Psalm 73:7 it says, "Their eyes swell out through fatness, and their heart overflow with follies." In short, the desire of the eyes describes someone who is captivated by an outward display of materialism. It's not just beauty about a man or a woman. It could be about a new car. It could be about a new toy. It could be about a new dress. You see that car, you think, I need to have it. You see that woman and you think, I need to have something like that. You see a position and you think, I need to have that. Why am I not having that? You see a dress and you feel like, I need to have it. It was so funny. I was watching an ad. I think it was for one of the online retail sites. The ad is literally like this. There is this girl who sees an object and boom, she clicks it. Now we have smartphone. So you take a picture of that, then it pops up and she buys and she's wearing and walking. And then another girl sees that, she takes a picture, boom, then and they're actually telling you, do it. You know what materialism is? It's just, I don't know, you guys haven't seen that ad? Oh, is it eBay? Oh, maybe. So that's exactly what they are telling you. It's cool. You see it, you want it, get it. Whether it is another person's wife or another position of power or another material good, you deserve it. That's the feeling of being like God. Because you are God, you see, you need to have without exceptions. You know, there's nothing wrong with cars or dresses or positions. In and of themselves, they are not bad. We need them to do our day-to-day life. But it's this inordinate epithumia, this desire, this addiction to have that is sinful. And thirdly, it says pride of life. Pride of life. I mean, I'm only reminded of this old quote we've heard numerous times, right? We buy things we don't like to impress people we don't love. That's the mantra still today. It's kind of drawing pride from things we own for the sake of floundering it. And I'm sure you've met some of these people in your lives, and some of us probably are like that. You tell them something like, hey, I went for a vacation here, and then they will come up with how they had an even bigger vacation than you. Or you tell them how you did this project, and how it went like this, and they'll tell how they did an even more complicated project and how it was like that. And sometimes we do that too. Pride of life. The Greek word is referring to a person who literally has nothing, but goes around from market to market floundering as though he has everything and he's going to sell this greatest cure of the world. That was the root words used in the times. It's this too much emphasis or desire on possessions. How much I have, putting faith in that. And somehow feeling if I have more, I am safe. That's what materialistic living is. Materialistic living is thinking the material world is my safety. The material world is my security. The material world is all there is to life, and therefore I need to make sure I'm firmly grounded on it. Just like eating, work to live and live to work. We work to live and not live to work. We do jobs we don't like to gain things which we feel will make us and our future secure. That's the sad reality, isn't it? Especially for immigrants. It doesn't even look like there is a choice. People complain, I don't like my job, I hate my job. But still we feel we are stuck to it. And therefore, to deal with that insecurity, we want to pile up all these other things to say, okay, if I have these, maybe my future is going to be safe. My future is going to be secure. And it is so interesting, like I said earlier, these are the same three things Adam and Eve faced. In Genesis 3:6, there is a correlation between them. It says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. Notice that the tree was good for food, lust of the flesh, a delight to the eyes, a lust of the eyes, and desired to make one wise, pride of life. It's going to make me smarter. This is what is called materialistic life, love for the material world, living as though we see what we see in the world is all there is to us. Thankfully, we just don't have Genesis 3 alone. We also have Jesus going through the same temptations later on and overcoming that. Jesus' temptation by Satan in the wilderness for 40 days falls in the same three categories. It says then in Matthew, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, and after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. He's trying to make Jesus put his faith on the material world and himself. And on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, the pride of life. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you fall down and worship me. And then Jesus said to him, be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you serve. And because of this, John concludes this section with the next verse to encourage us to seek a love that lasts. Verse 17, he says, and the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. He says, why should you not love the world? He says, why should you not be materialistic? Why should you not put your faith on the material things of the world as though they are the ones that are going to take care of you and your future and will give you your sense of self-worth and dignity and all these things? You know why? because all these things are going to pass away. Yes, here's the issue. When you do it, you feel like you are in control. When you're able to project an image of yourself that makes people like you, it feels like you are in control. When you're able to fill your life with possessions and feel safe, it looks like you are in control. For me, sometimes coffee reminds me of this truth more than anything else. When I'm super tired, but I have to get something done, I just go and load myself up with coffee. My brain is like awake. I can get a lot of stuff done. Boom, boom, boom. And then have you experienced that crashing moment when the caffeine wears away and you're like, man, it's just like a crash. It's the same thing. Beauty will fade away. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, as we get older, our skins will start getting wrinkles. You can't stop that. Maybe there are some surgeries I hear nowadays, but I don't know if they can keep you perennially young and smooth skin, young skin. You see all the ads, sometimes it is so funny for me. You will have white hair, yeah, you can cover it up with all the fancy dyes, but when you look in the mirror every 3-4 days, my hair is gray. And the jobs that you do today, however cool they are, however cutting edge they are, will become so irrelevant 20 years from now. They may not even be using any of the languages you use today. Are you using the languages you used 20 years ago? They said it's impossible to nowadays give a decent university education to anyone because the world is growing so fast, things are happening so fast that none of the universities are able to catch up to train people, because if they train you for what's happening now, by the time you graduate from school, technology has evolved and things have moved on. So even if you have a PhD, you have to start learning something new. I actually experienced this. I'm sure we have some friends who are here who would experience that too. And what you think is cool today, no one's going to think it's cool 20 years from now. And you give your heart and soul and life into it. House prices can crash too sometimes, And cars, we know, lose value once you drive out of the dealership, 20%, 30%. No one's going to recognize your greatest achievements 30 years from now and say, wow. So why do we then still love these things? Why do we then put our faith on these things? Why do we then try to draw our sense of worth and identity and safety and security from the material things? And that's what John says. In fact, he has nothing. He's going to end up dying in prison, in a jail, where no one knows where he is. He has nobody else to stay with him. The only person he has is him and God, but he gets this glorious vision of new heavens and new earth that was just enough for John. So he can say this rather than me or anybody else. And so he says the best way to defeat one love is to fill it with another love. Love of the Father. He says, whoever does the will of God abides in him forever. How does this happen? It happens by looking at Christ, who gave up control, who gave up being God. We do this because we want to be God, but he gave up being God. He gave up everything we go after desperately, who was tempted like us, but without sin. In fact, for the sake of you and me to be loved by God, he became unlovable by his God, the Father. On the cross, the Father who told, "This is my Son Jesus," when he was baptized, "in whom I am well pleased," he turned his face away from this Jesus, knowing that it cost Jesus to experience this. So we can experience his love alone will enable us to love him and not the world. Kids sing the song, "Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear." I think that song's more for adults. The kids have hijacked it from us. You need to be playing that song every time you go to work in the morning. The reason we tend to get fixated on the material world is it's because we don't know the enemy. And the enemy is not out there. The enemy is inside, our own sin, our own self. So when we don't know that, we forget to look for help. We forget to look to Christ. It's only when we don't look at Christ we start loving the world around us. But when we look to Him, He becomes so beautiful, and we start loving Him. Now, couple of weeks ago, I heard this sad story. I think Jemima was sharing with me. There was this couple in India, and the wife wanted to come to the United States, and so the husband worked super hard to get her to come here with all the money that was needed. So she did come here, and he didn't get his visa, and so he couldn't come in time to join her. And so they had to stay separated for a long time, but in that time, she actually started developing a relationship with another powerful, wealthy individual in this country. She stopped communicating to him, she stopped responding to him for a long time, and finally his visa and all got through, and he ended up coming here, and they got reunited. But he saw that his wife was a very different person. She wasn't talking to him, she wasn't responding to him the way she did when she was before, and he had sacrificed his life, his career, everything for her. And finally he found out that though he had paid all this cost, her love was for someone else. And it broke him, it crushed him. He cried his home and called and said, "This has happened," and they told him, "Come back home." But a few hours later, he killed himself. He couldn't deal with this pain and agony. That's the power of addiction, my friends. The world, the material world, when we put our epithumia, our desire, our addiction towards it and fail to look at our own self and look at Christ, this can happen to us. If we remain too disconnected with Jesus, too far from Him, we will also be pulled away from Him. And let's not forget the cross. Let's not forget the love. Let Christ be our addiction. He will only be if we know how deep sin runs within us and how much great His love overflows for us. You know, there was this interesting social experiment, I'll conclude with this, that psychotherapists did with it. It's a dog and the bone experiment. You know, there was a dog and there was a bone and there was a master. And they put the bone down and there is the dog, and they tell the dog, "Don't eat the bone." Now all the dogs that kept looking at the bone stayed for 30 seconds, 40 seconds, maximum 1 minute, and they went for it. The only dogs that resisted and never ate this were the ones who kept looking straight into the eyes of their master and did not look at the bone. They were the only ones who were able to overcome this. And it's the same with us as Christians. If we want to love God and not love the world, you cannot be looking at the world and saying, "I want to love God." Our eyes need to be fixed upon Jesus. And that's the reason we have so many opportunities for us to grow in our spiritual journeys, too. You know, we have the Gospel 101 we've started in our women's group, where we want to walk people through this experience of seeing how amazing Jesus is, or Men's Reconnect. And encouraging all of us to have this personal time with God and have accountable relationships. We cannot do this alone, my friends. And it's actually a responsibility for us as parents. Every time we see our children fail, how we engage with them is a gospel moment to help fix their eyes upon Jesus and not be worried that they are actually not representing us well. And personally, whatever may be our addictions in life, the best way to overcome them is to starve the sources practically on the one hand, and to have a date with Jesus Christ every day in your lives. And as we do this, we will be victorious in not loving the world not loving the things in the world, not being a materialistic Christian that doesn't even exist. It's an oxymoron, but we can be victorious Christian as we live in union with this Jesus Christ. Because with Jesus, we can do everything. Without him, we can do nothing. Let's pray.